What is up, everybody, and welcome to FLW videos. In today's episode, we are going to have some fun and determine what is the best legendary Pokemon in Pokemon Go. And the way we are going to do it is using a March Madness style bracket. I ended up getting this idea from a guy named Fantano, another YouTuber, who did this on a music album, and I thought, whoa, I have to do this in Pokemon Go. It would be so much fun, and we're going to kind of use the bracket to decide. I ended up picking some completely random positions. Some of the Pokemon do get some buys because there's kind of like a weird number of them. And then I also decided to add in all of the Deoxys forms that are available just because we can raid them via EX. So I thought they were kind of like an honorable mention to put into it. But regardless of that, I'm super excited about it. I'm going to give you my opinion on these Pokemon, why I choose one over the other. And hey, we're going to have some fun as well as provide some value. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the video. So let's go ahead and jump into it. We're going to go ahead and disperse the bracket, and then we will be going through all of them. Go ahead and get yourself a brief look at all of the matchups. Once again, I do want to reiterate that it is picked at random throughout this. We do have a couple of buys, so don't put too much skin in the game for that. All right, let's go ahead and get started on this. I think the first battle we need to probably start with is from the outside. We'll move down, move across, move up, and just kind of like go around in a circle. The first battle that we have to take a look at is Groudon versus Palkia. Two very different Pokemon, and what can we say about it? I mean, I think that I would edge towards Groudon because it is one of the best ground type attackers. It's also fairly good having on Solar Beam, and then Palkia, on the other hand, isn't necessarily bad, but it doesn't have a double water type moveset, and then it also doesn't have access to Outrage. If it had those two things, I do think it would be a little bit more solid of an option, but I'm going to go ahead and have to give this one to Groudon. Moving on to the next one is Entei versus Regirock, and I'm going to go ahead and foreshadow this. I don't see too much success with the Regis, so yes, we do have Entei winning this one. Up next is Giratina Origin Form versus Cresselia. Once again, another cakewalk because Giratina Origin Form is going to be magnificent. We'll talk a little bit more about it as the rounds get a little bit tougher. Up next is Zapdos versus Regice. Sorry about you, Regice. It is going to be to Zapdos big time. Up next is Kyogre versus Deoxys. Now, Kyogre is going to absolutely slam it out of the park versus this Deoxys defense form. Like I said, once we move on, we will talk a little bit more about some of these Pokemon. Moving to the opposite side of the bracket, we are going to see Mewtwo versus Lugia, and we all know some Pokemon had to face up against Mewtwo, and unfortunately, Lugia drew the straw. So yes, we are going to go with Mewtwo, and I have some really cool things to talk about a little bit later on. Up next is Articuno versus Rayquaza. Rayquaza is my boy. I do like Articuno, but because it can get outpaced by a Mamoswine, I really don't feel like there is much competition in this. But as you can see, we will be going up against Raikou next, which will be a little bit more of a tougher opponent. Up next is Dialga versus Moltres. Now, this is quite the matchup to begin with, especially. You've got Dialga. It's a pretty decent steel type. It's also pretty good as a dragon type, and because of its typing, not taking super effective damage versus other dragons, yes, it is niche in that way, and I know a lot of people like Dialga, but Moltres, on the other hand, is one of the best flying type attackers, one of the best fire type attackers, and because of that, especially because of adding on like the move Sky Attack like I mentioned briefly, I do think that I am gonna have to give this one to Moltres, although it was a fairly close one. We have yet again another very close matchup. We have Latios versus Ho-Oh. Now, initially, I would have given this to Latios pretty much automatically, but there was a little bit of an update to Ho-Oh in regards to the moveset, which now allows it to potentially have a double fire type moveset, and it does have a lot of potential that just needed to be unlocked via the moveset. So because of that and kind of like the focus on Ho-Oh, I do like it. I do like the shiny. I like that now because we have hidden power, we have a little bit more flexibility with it. I'm gonna have to go with Ho-Oh, but I could easily see you going either way. Up next is Heatran versus Deoxys attack form. To be honest, I just don't think Deoxys has enough meat on it to really like stay in the game as far as this is concerned. So yes, Heatran is going to get the win. So now we are officially ready to go into the second round. We're going to go ahead and circle back to the first battle, Deoxys versus Groudon. Groudon is an absolute monster. Deoxys gets completely outperformed by so many other psychic types, so I think that this is an easy decision to make. Up next is Entei versus Giratina Origin Form. Now this is a close one because Entei is not necessarily a bad fire type attacker. It's probably like second place, maybe third place. It's definitely behind Moltres, but it does have some bulk to it. Then you have Giratina Origin Form on the other hand, got an updated moveset which includes Shadow Ball. If this Pokemon did not have Shadow Ball, I don't think I would even consider it. It would definitely go to Entei. But because of adding on the move Shadow Ball, I do think that Giratina Origin Form deserves the win for this, especially as taking like the #1 spot from a Ghost type perspective. Up next, we see kind of the brother version of it. We've got Giratina Altered Form versus Zapdos. Now I have to say, Giratina Altered Form, one thing that it does have going for it is easily the dominance from a PvP perspective. It massacres Pokemon in the Masters League, in the Great League, but is that enough for us to give it the win? Zapdos, on the other hand, is like the #2 spot. It's been around for a very long period of time. I think for Zapdos to get like an absolute clear win, what it would need is some more different types of moves as opposed to just literally all electric. We would love to see a flying type move, but regardless of that, even including the potential, I'm actually going to go with Zapdos on this one, even though it was very close. Up next is Kyogre versus Latias. Unfortunately for Latias, Kyogre is just kind of in the path of it. Kyogre was destined to win this. It is the #1 water type attacker. It does have some other flexibility along with its moveset, and then just a complete dominance. And it's not even necessarily at its full potential. We've got a primal form coming out at some point in time. We also have an exclusive move, or like a signature move that isn't even out yet either. So regardless of like even all the potential stuff, Kyogre is definitely one that I think that deserves the win. Up next is Mewtwo versus Suicune. And I have to say that this was definitely a close one. Yeah, poor Suicune. Sorry about ya. It's gonna be Mewtwo on this one. Up next, we have a very solid battle, Raikou versus Rayquaza. Raikou, one of the best electric type attackers. Rayquaza, one of the best dragon type attackers. And then, as far as some other things are concerned, some other factors, Raikou gained access to the move Shadow Ball, which gives it a little bit of kind of like some random viability, while Rayquaza, on the other hand, does have access to a double flying type moveset, and it's actually like the second best flying type attacker, maybe like the third. So in this case, I think they're just two powerhouses going up against each other. I can't wait for Raikou to come back into some raids. Hopefully we'll get a shiny really for both of these, but I'm going to go ahead and have to give the win to Rayquaza. Up next, we've got two fire legendary birds battling it out, Moltres versus Ho-Oh. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier, a little bit briefly, was that Moltres was the #1 fire type attacker, the #1 flying type attacker, and although Ho-Oh is kind of cool in like a novel way, especially with that hidden power, I think it is pretty much subpar almost in every way in Pokemon Go, so we're going to have to give the win to Moltres. Moving up, we've got Registeel versus Heatran, so the final Reggie that's at least available now. We didn't include Regigigas on this one. So as far as this is concerned, I think Heatran by default is going to win this one. I mean, to be honest, the Reggies just aren't necessarily made for Pokemon Go. They may be good in some other ways, like outside of the game, but as far as the way that it's kind of brought up in game, the Reggies are kind of screwed, but who knows? Regigigas could redeem all of them. Let's go ahead and circle back. We are ready for the third round. We've got Groudon versus Giratina Origin Form. I have to say, in this case, it feels like such a toss-up. You've got Giratina, which is doing fairly well from that Ghost type perspective. You've got Groudon doing well from the Ground type, and then also fairly good from the Grass typing because of it having access to Solar Beam. To be honest, I think as far as like their current performance, they're pretty much neck and neck, but the only difference between the two is that Groudon has a huge amount of unreleased potential. It could end up getting some different movesets. It will eventually get an Origin Form as well. So regardless of that, I think we have to go with Groudon because of the future potential, even though both of these Pokemon are performing great. Up next is Kyogre versus Zapdos. Now, I'm gonna have to go with Kyogre on this one. I think Kyogre is just so dominant from that water typing, and then the fact that it has like an ice type move, it has a little bit of flexibility, but like I said, it definitely has some future value. And then Zapdos isn't necessarily even the #1 attacker from the electric typing or from obviously from the flying, since it doesn't have any flying type moves. So I think we can go ahead and go with Kyogre on this one, and you're gonna see a crazy matchup between Groudon and Kyogre. But let's go ahead and finish up the bracket. We've got Rayquaza versus Mewtwo. What the heck do you do on this one? This is a solid matchup. Now I have to say, when Mewtwo was only like gaining access to like 3 or 4 different types of moves, of course Shadow Ball being the best, and then it kind of had Psychic as far as some usability, I would be very much a toss-up on this one. But the fact that Mewtwo got its moves upgraded to include some extra moves like Thunderbolt, Flamethrower, Ice Beam, all of just pretty much a Swiss Army knife, and then even dominating in several other types. Obviously doing very well as a Ghost type attacker, a Psychic type attacker, even good as an Ice type attacker. Because of that flexibility, I do think I am going to have to go with Mewtwo on this one. Moving up to the top of the bracket, we've got Heatran versus Moltres. Now in this case, which one do you go with? Well, I have to say, as far as the two Pokemon are concerned from like a fire typing, I think Moltres has a little bit of an edge. Heatran unfortunately didn't get that great of a moveset either, and then Moltres gaining that new move of Sky Attack during the legendary bird day of Moltres. I think Moltres is the clear victor here. But who knows, maybe in the future Heatran gets some new movesets. It could find a little bit more viability in certain cases. So we are finally down to the final 4. We've got Groudon and Kyogre up first. So once again, these two Pokemon have the exact same stats. Whether or not you knew that, it is true. Pretty cool, kind of random, but yes. So they have the same stats. So what separates one from the other? Well, for me personally, I think that Groudon being the best from a ground type perspective isn't that impressive, unfortunately, because in cases where ground type is super effective and there are other different types of like typings, I think Groudon finds itself getting outpaced quite a bit from other types. But that's not Groudon's fault. And then you've got the grass typing as well with Solar Beam. I mean, it still gets outpaced. And then you've got Kyogre on the other hand, just plain out dominating from that water typing, of course having some future potential as well. I mean, really, this is quite a bit of a toss-up, but for my personal preference, I think I'm gonna have to go with Kyogre. You can let me know if you agree with that in the comment section below. I could definitely see it going both ways. Up next is Moltres versus Mewtwo. Now, Moltres puts up quite a bit of an argument. #1 fire type attacker, #1 flying type attacker, but Mewtwo has some tricks up its sleeves as well. It's the #1 from the Psychic typing. It's now like technically #2 from the Ghost typing, using that Shadow Ball, like technically behind Giratina Origin form. But then you venture out into those other movesets where you've got like the Ice Beam, you've got Thunderbolt, you've got Flamethrower. There's just so much flexibility among Mewtwo, and they seem kind of neck and neck, but those extra moves really, in my mind, propel Mewtwo ahead of Moltres, but definitely a close one. Ladies and gentlemen, we are down to the final game. We have Kyogre versus Mewtwo. Which one is going to win? We've been talking a lot about these Pokemon. We've been covering some of the points, and I just have to say, Mewtwo has been a dominant Pokemon in the game. And to make it even more overpowered with all of those extra moves, I don't know exactly what Pokemon Go or, Niantic were thinking. I mean, I think that there's some clear favoritism towards Mewtwo to really propel it forward. I cannot wait until it gets access to maybe a new move or even a shiny. People are going to go absolutely insane for this. So yes, let's go ahead and give a huge congrats to Mewtwo. So yeah, that just about wraps up the video. I hope you had a lot of fun with me. Hopefully I gave you some points about this and you did enjoy it. I want to go ahead and know what you think about it in the comment section below. What do you think is the best legendary Pokemon in Pokemon Go? Definitely put it in the comment section below, and if you did enjoy this type of content, make sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. I wanted to extend a huge thank you to the supporters over at Patreon. You definitely make this possible, and I 100% appreciate this support. If you are interested in supporting my channel on Patreon, definitely feel free to check out the link in the description.